Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of humanity's most complex stories of love, deception, and divine purpose. We're talking about Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, a tale that goes far beyond just a love triangle. And before we start, just a heads up, you probably think you know this story. Not because it is simple. Well, maybe it seems that way on the surface. But if you really dig into what theologians, historians, and storytellers have been wrestling with for millennia, you'll realize this isn't just about a man caught between two sisters. It is about divine election, human manipulation, the complexity of family dynamics, and how God works through flawed people to accomplish his purposes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy diving deep into stories that have shaped civilizations and continue to resonate in our modern world. Also, I'd love to know what city you are watching from. And what is your take on family loyalty? Should we prioritize blood relations over romantic love, or is that an impossible choice? Now, dim the lights, maybe grab something warm to drink, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins not with love, but with conflict, the kind that tears families apart. Jacob, whose name means supplanter or heel grabber, lived up to his reputation from the moment of birth. Born grasping his twin brother Esau's heel, Jacob seemed destined for a life of struggle and competition. The younger of Isaac's sons, Jacob possessed something his stronger. Hairier brother lacked cunning intelligence and strategic thinking. While Esau excelled in hunting and outdoor pursuits, Jacob preferred the quieter life of tents and contemplation. Their father Isaac favored Esau, drawn to his son's prowess as a hunter and provider of savory game. But their mother Rebekah, remembering the divine prophecy given during her difficult pregnancy, favored Jacob instead. The oracle had declared that the older shall serve the younger, setting the stage for decades of family tension. This favoritism created a household divided, where brothers competed not just for inheritance, but for parental love. Jacob's first major victory came through a simple transaction: a bowl of lentil stew in exchange for birthright. Esau, returning famished from an unsuccessful hunt, rashly traded his inheritance for immediate satisfaction and sustenance. But Jacob's greatest deception was yet to come, orchestrated by his mother during Isaac's final blessing ceremony. Disguised in goatskins and Esau's clothing, Jacob received the blessing meant for the firstborn son instead. When Esau discovered the deception, his rage burned so intensely that Jacob feared for his very life. Rebekah, sensing the danger, urged Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in the distant land of Haran. "Stay with him until your brother's fury subsides," she counseled, not knowing this separation would last decades. Isaac, despite his disappointment, blessed Jacob's journey and sent him away with patriarchal authority and hope. So Jacob departed from Beersheba, carrying only his staff and the weight of his family's expectations. The journey to Haran would take him through wilderness, past ancient cities, and toward an uncertain future. As he travelled, Jacob must have wondered if his clever schemes had truly been worth the price. He had gained the blessing but lost his home, his family, and his brother's love. The road stretched endlessly before him, each step taking him further from everything he had known. Little did Jacob know that this journey would transform him from a deceiver into a patriarch. His destination held not just refuge, but the love of his life and the foundation of God's people. The sun set behind him as he walked eastward, toward a destiny neither he nor his family could have imagined. As night fell on Jacob's first day of travel, exhaustion overtook his anxious spirit and racing thoughts. Finding a suitable place to rest, he gathered stones to create a makeshift pillow in the wilderness. The ground was hard, the air cool, and his heart heavy with the weight of his choices. Sleep came fitfully at first, his mind replaying the deception that had driven him from home. But as his breathing deepened and his body relaxed, something extraordinary began to unfold in his dreams. A ladder appeared, stretching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending its mysterious steps. The vision was so vivid, so real, that Jacob felt he could reach out and touch the heavenly messengers. At the top of the ladder stood the Lord God himself, radiant with glory and speaking with authority. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac," the voice declared. "The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring forever." The promise continued, expanding beyond land to encompass descendants, numerous as the dust of the earth. Your offspring shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. In you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed, God proclaimed. But the most comforting words were yet to come, a personal promise of divine presence and protection. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you, the Lord assured him. Jacob awakened with a start, his heart pounding, and his entire being filled with awe and wonder. The presence of God lingered in the air around him, making the very ground feel sacred and holy. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it, he whispered in amazement. Fear mixed with reverence, as he realized he had encountered the divine in this unlikely wilderness location. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Rising early in the morning, Jacob took the stone he had used as a pillow and set it upright. He poured oil on top of it, consecrating it as a memorial to this life-changing encounter with God. Jacob named the place Bethel, meaning house of God, though it had previously been called Luz. Then he made a solemn vow, binding himself to the God who had appeared to him in the dream. If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, he promised, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you, he concluded. This encounter transformed Jacob's understanding of his journey from exile to divine mission and calling. No longer was he simply fleeing his brother's wrath. He was walking in God's appointed path. The vision at Bethel became the foundation of Jacob's faith and the cornerstone of his future hope. With renewed purpose and divine assurance, he continued his journey toward Haran and his uncle Laban's household. After many days of travel, Jacob finally approached the region of Haran, his mother's ancestral homeland. The landscape was different here, more green and fertile, with evidence of established communities and agriculture. As he crested a hill, Jacob spotted a well in a field, with 3 flocks of sheep lying nearby. The well was covered with a large stone, and shepherds were gathered around it, waiting patiently. Jacob approached the shepherds, his heart hopeful that they might provide information about his uncle Laban. "My brothers, where do you come from?" he asked, using the customary greeting of fellow travellers. "We are from Haran," they replied, confirming that Jacob had indeed reached his intended destination successfully. "Do you know Laban the son of Nahor?" Jacob inquired, his voice betraying his eagerness and anticipation. "We know him," they answered simply, and Jacob's heart leaped with excitement at this confirmation. "Is it well with him?" Jacob pressed, hoping for news of his uncle's health and prosperity. "It is well," they assured him. "And see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." Jacob's eyes followed their pointing hands to see a young woman approaching with her father's flock. Even from a distance, there was something about her that caught Jacob's attention and held it fast. She moved with grace and confidence, clearly comfortable with her shepherding duties and familiar with the terrain. "Look," the shepherds continued, "it is still broad daylight. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them," they suggested, indicating the normal routine of midday watering. But Jacob noticed something peculiar. The shepherds seemed to be waiting for something, or someone specific. "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well," they explained. "Then we water the sheep," they concluded, revealing the local custom that required community cooperation. As Rachel drew nearer, Jacob could see that she was indeed beautiful, with dark eyes and graceful movements. Something stirred in his heart, a feeling he had never experienced before, deep and immediate. When Rachel reached the well with her father's sheep, Jacob felt compelled to act rather than wait. Perhaps it was his desire to impress her, or perhaps it was simply his natural tendency to take charge. Regardless of the motivation, Jacob stepped forward and single-handedly rolled the stone from the well's mouth. The stone was large and heavy, normally requiring several men to move it safely and efficiently. But Jacob, motivated by something beyond mere physical strength, managed to move it alone with apparent ease. He then proceeded to water Rachel's sheep, performing the service that was typically done by the shepherd. Rachel watched in amazement as this stranger took care of her father's flock with such unexpected kindness. When Jacob finished watering the sheep, he turned to Rachel and kissed her in greeting. Then he lifted up his voice and wept, overcome by emotion. At this providential meeting, "I am your father's kinsman," he explained through his tears. "I am Rebekah's son." Rachel's eyes widened with understanding and joy as she realized this was her cousin from the south. She had heard stories of her Aunt Rebekah and the family that had moved to Canaan long ago. Without hesitation, Rachel ran to tell her father about Jacob's arrival and their miraculous meeting at the well. When Laban heard the news of Jacob's arrival, he immediately ran to meet his nephew at the well. The reunion was warm and emotional, with Laban embracing Jacob and kissing him in the traditional Middle Eastern greeting. "Surely you are my bone and my flesh," Laban declared, acknowledging their family connection with genuine affection. Laban brought Jacob to his house, where Jacob recounted all the events that had led to his journey. He spoke of his father Isaac's blessing, his mother Rebekah's counsel, and his need for refuge from Esau's anger. Jacob also shared his vision at Bethel, though perhaps not in complete detail about God's promises. Laban listened with interest, occasionally asking questions about family members and their welfare back in Canaan. "You are indeed my bone and my flesh," Laban repeated, welcoming Jacob into his household with apparent sincerity. Jacob stayed with Laban for a month, helping with the flocks and learning the routines of the household. During this time, he observed the family dynamics and became increasingly aware of Rachel's beauty and character. He also noticed Leah, Rachel's older sister, who had lovely eyes but was considered less beautiful than Rachel. Jacob worked diligently during his stay, proving himself valuable to Laban's sheep and cattle operations. His skills as a shepherd, learned during his years in Canaan, served him well in this new environment. Laban, ever the shrewd businessman, recognized Jacob's worth and began to consider how to retain his services. After a month had passed, Laban approached Jacob with what seemed like a generous proposition. "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing?" he asked with apparent concern. "Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Laban inquired, as if purely interested in Jacob's welfare. Jacob had been thinking about this very question, his heart already decided on what he truly wanted. "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter," he proposed without hesitation. The request was bold and direct, revealing the depth of Jacob's feelings for Rachel. After just 1 month, Laban's eyes lit up with satisfaction, though he carefully concealed his pleasure at this arrangement. "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man," he agreed. "Stay with me," Laban concluded, sealing the agreement with words that sounded generous but concealed his true intentions. Jacob's heart soared with joy at Laban's acceptance of his proposal and the promise of future happiness. 7 years seemed like nothing when weighed against the prospect of making Rachel his wife. He had no way of knowing that Laban had his own plans that would test Jacob's character and determination. Laban was pleased because he had secured 7 years of free labor from a skilled and motivated worker. He also knew the local customs better than Jacob did, customs that might work to his advantage. But for now, Jacob was content to begin his 7 years of service, motivated by love and anticipation. The arrangement seemed perfect to him: honest work in exchange for the woman he loved. Little did he know that Laban's definition of fairness would prove quite different from his own. Jacob threw himself into his work with an enthusiasm that amazed everyone in Laban's household. His love for Rachel transformed what could have been drudgery into a labor of joy and anticipation. Each morning brought him closer to his wedding day, and each evening reminded him of his beloved's beauty. The flocks prospered under Jacob's care, growing in number and health beyond Laban's expectations. Jacob's innovative shepherding techniques and his genuine care for the animals produced remarkable results. He studied the local grazing patterns, learned about seasonal changes, and adapted his methods accordingly. His reputation as a skilled shepherd spread throughout the region, bringing honor to Laban's household. During the hot summer months, Jacob worked tirelessly, moving the flocks to find the best pasture. In winter, he protected them from storms and predators, often staying with them through the coldest nights. His dedication went beyond mere duty. It was fueled by his vision of a future with Rachel. The other shepherds marveled at Jacob's commitment and his seemingly inexhaustible energy for the work. "He works as if each sheep were his own," they commented, not understanding the deeper motivation. Jacob's relationship with Rachel deepened during these 7 years, though always within proper boundaries. They would talk by the well in the evenings, sharing stories and dreams for their future together. Rachel appreciated Jacob's dedication and his willingness to work so hard for her hand in marriage. She saw in him qualities that set him apart from the other men in her integrity, determination, and genuine love. Jacob learned about Rachel's character during these years, discovering her intelligence and gentle spirit. She was not just beautiful, but also wise, kind to servants, and skilled in the domestic arts. Their love grew stronger with each passing season, tested by time and proven by consistent devotion. Jacob also developed a relationship with Leah during these years, though it was quite different from his feelings for Rachel. Leah was kind and hard-working, but Jacob's heart belonged completely to her younger sister. He treated Leah with respect and kindness, but there was never any romantic interest on his part. This dynamic created a subtle tension in the household, though it was rarely acknowledged openly. Laban watched all these developments with calculating eyes, planning his strategy for the approaching wedding day. He had grown wealthy from Jacob's labor and was reluctant to lose such a productive worker. The 7 years passed more quickly than Jacob had expected, filled with purpose and anticipation. They seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her, the ancient text records. As the 7th year drew to a close, Jacob's excitement grew almost unbearable. He had fulfilled his part of the bargain completely, working harder than any hired servant would have. The flocks had multiplied dramatically, and Laban's wealth had increased substantially during Jacob's service. Now it was time for Laban to fulfill his part of the agreement and give Rachel to Jacob as his wife. Jacob began to make plans for the wedding celebration, dreaming of the life he and Rachel would build together. He had no suspicion that Laban had other plans that would test Jacob's character once again. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic deceptions in biblical history. As the 7 years of Jacob's service drew to a close, he approached Laban with eager anticipation. "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed," Jacob requested formally. Laban agreed readily, perhaps too readily, and began making preparations for the wedding celebration. He gathered all the men of the place and made a great feast, as was customary for weddings. The celebration was elaborate and joyful, with food, wine, music, and dancing, continuing late into the night. Jacob participated fully in the festivities, his heart overflowing with happiness and anticipation for his wedding night. The wine flowed freely, and the atmosphere was one of celebration and community joy. As the evening progressed, Jacob may have noticed that Rachel seemed unusually quiet and withdrawn, but in the excitement of the celebration and the effects of the wine, he attributed it to bridal nerves. The custom of the time was for the bride to be heavily veiled during the wedding ceremony. This veiling was so complete that the bride's face was entirely hidden from view throughout the proceedings. As night fell and the celebration reached its peak, the time came for the bride to be brought to Jacob. According to tradition, she was escorted to the bridal chamber by the women of the household. The room was dark, lit only by oil lamps that cast flickering shadows on the walls. Jacob waited eagerly for his bride, his heart pounding with excitement and love for Rachel. When the veiled figure was brought to him, Jacob embraced her tenderly, believing he was finally holding his beloved. The darkness and the heavy veiling made it impossible to see clearly, and Jacob's joy overwhelmed his senses. He spoke words of love and tenderness to the woman he believed to be Rachel. The night passed in what Jacob thought was perfect happiness, the culmination of 7 years of patient waiting. But when morning came, and the first light of dawn crept through the window, Jacob's world shattered. The woman beside him was not Rachel, but Leah, her older sister. The shock was so profound that Jacob could hardly comprehend what had happened to him. "What is this you have done to me?" he confronted Laban, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Jacob demanded. Laban's response was calm and matter-of-fact, as if his deception was perfectly reasonable and justified. "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn," he explained. "Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also," Laban continued. "In return for serving me another 7 years," he added, revealing the true extent of his manipulation. Jacob realized he had been outmaneuvered by someone even more cunning than himself. The deceiver had been deceived, and the irony was not lost on Jacob as he considered his situation. He thought of how he had deceived his own father and stolen his brother's blessing through trickery. Now he was experiencing the bitter taste of being on the receiving end of such deception. But his love for Rachel was so strong that he was willing to accept Laban's terms despite the betrayal. The week of celebration for his marriage to Leah passed in a blur of conflicted emotions. Jacob found himself in an impossible situation, married to Leah, but still desperately in love with Rachel. After completing the week of celebration for his marriage to Leah, Laban kept his word about Rachel. Jacob was given Rachel as his second wife, and his joy at finally being united with his beloved was overwhelming. But this joy was tempered by the complexity of his situation and the pain he could see in Leah's eyes. Leah understood that she had been used as a pawn in her father's scheme to extract more labor from Jacob. She also knew that Jacob's heart belonged to Rachel, not to her, despite their marriage bond. This knowledge created a deep wound in Leah's heart that would never fully heal throughout her life. Jacob began his second 7 years of service to Laban, but now his circumstances were dramatically different. He was married to 2 sisters, creating a household dynamic that was fraught with tension and competition. The ancient text makes it clear that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and this preference was obvious to everyone. Leah struggled with feelings of rejection and unworthiness, despite being Jacob's first wife legally. Rachel, while finally married to the man she loved, had to deal with the reality of sharing him with her sister. The sisters' relationship, once close, became strained by their competing claims on Jacob's affection and attention. Jacob tried to be fair to both wives, but his heart's preference for Rachel was difficult to disguise. He spent more time with Rachel, spoke more tenderly to her, and showed her more affection publicly. This favoritism created a painful dynamic that affected every aspect of the household's daily life. Leah threw herself into her duties as a wife, hoping to earn Jacob's love through her service and devotion. She was skilled in domestic arts and worked hard to make their home comfortable and well managed. Rachel, secure in Jacob's love, was perhaps less motivated to prove herself through domestic achievements. But both women shared a common desire to bear children for Jacob and establish their place in his life. In the ancient world, a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to produce offspring, especially sons. Children were seen as a blessing from God and as security for a woman's future within the household. Both Leah and Rachel understood that bearing Jacob's children would strengthen their position and legacy. The stage was set for a competition that would span years and produce 12 sons who would become the patriarchs of Israel. But this competition would also deepen the rift between the sisters and create lasting family tensions. Jacob, caught between his 2 wives, would have to navigate the complex emotions and competing claims on his affection. His household was about to become a battleground where love, jealousy, and divine providence would intersect in unexpected ways. The man who had once deceived his father and brother now found himself managing the consequences of deception in his own family. God's promise to make Jacob's descendants numerous was about to be fulfilled, but not in the way Jacob might have expected. God, in his perfect wisdom and compassion, saw the pain and rejection that Leah endured in her marriage. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. The ancient text records with divine sympathy. The word hated here doesn't mean Jacob despised Leah, but rather that she was loved less than Rachel. This distinction mattered little to Leah, who felt the constant sting of being the unwanted wife, but God's intervention in her life would prove to be both a blessing and a source of deeper conflict. Leah conceived and bore Jacob a son, her joy overwhelming at this sign of divine favor. She named him Reuben, meaning "see, a son," a name that reflected both her joy and her hope. "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction," Leah declared, "surely now my husband will love me." Her hope was that bearing Jacob's firstborn son would finally earn her the love she desperately craved. The birth of Reuben was celebrated throughout the household, as the arrival of a firstborn son always was. Jacob was pleased to have a son, but this joy didn't translate into increased affection for Leah. His heart remained with Rachel, and Leah's hope for his love remained unfulfilled despite her motherhood. Undeterred by this disappointment, Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. She named him Simeon, meaning hearing, because she said, "The Lord has heard that I am hated. Therefore he has given me this son also," she proclaimed, still hoping that children would change Jacob's feelings. The pattern was becoming clear. God was blessing Leah with children, while Rachel remained barren. This divine intervention created a complex dynamic in the household, mixing blessing with increased tension. Leah's third pregnancy resulted in another son, whom she named Levi, meaning joined or attached. "Now this time my husband will be attached to me," she declared hopefully, "because I have borne him 3 sons." But again, Jacob's feelings toward Leah remained unchanged, despite his growing family and her obvious devotion. Rachel watched these developments with growing anxiety and desperation, seeing her sister's fertility as a threat to her own position. The ancient world viewed barrenness as a sign of divine disfavor, which added to Rachel's emotional burden. She began to feel that her beauty and Jacob's love were not enough to secure her place in the household. Leah's 4th pregnancy brought her another son, whom she named Judah, meaning praise. "This time I will praise the Lord," she said, perhaps beginning to find contentment in God's blessing rather than seeking Jacob's love. The name Judah proved to be prophetic, as this son would become the ancestor of the royal line of David. Through Judah's lineage would come the promised Messiah, making Leah's contribution to salvation history immeasurable. But at the time, Leah simply knew that God had blessed her with 4 sons, while Rachel remained childless. This divine favor toward Leah created a tension that would only intensify as the years passed. Rachel's frustration grew with each of Leah's pregnancies, and she began to take desperate measures to compete. The household, that had once been filled with joy at Jacob's marriages, was now charged with rivalry and tension. Jacob found himself caught between his 2 wives, unable to satisfy either one completely. His love for Rachel remained constant, but his respect for Leah grew as she proved herself as a mother. Rachel's anguish at her barrenness grew with each of Leah's pregnancies, consuming her thoughts and emotions. The woman who had once been secure in Jacob's love now felt threatened and inadequate. In the ancient world, a woman's primary value was often measured by her ability to bear children, especially sons. Rachel's beauty and Jacob's love seemed insufficient when compared to Leah's growing family and obvious divine favor. "Give me children, or I shall die," Rachel cried out to Jacob in her desperation and emotional pain. Her words revealed the depth of her anguish and her feeling that life without children was meaningless. Jacob's anger flared at Rachel's demand, perhaps because he felt helpless to solve her problem. "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" he responded. His words, though true, were perhaps harsher than necessary for someone he loved so deeply. Rachel realized that direct confrontation with Jacob would not solve her problem, so she devised another plan. Following ancient customs, and the example of Sarah with Hagar, Rachel decided to use a surrogate mother. "Here is my servant Bilhah," Rachel said to Jacob. "Go in to her, so that she may give birth on my knees. And even I may have children through her," Rachel explained, revealing her desperate hope for motherhood. The custom of surrogate motherhood was legally recognized in the ancient world, allowing children born to servants to be credited to their mistresses. Jacob agreed to Rachel's plan, perhaps understanding her desperation and wanting to help ease her pain. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son, whom Rachel named Dan, meaning judged or vindicated. "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and given me a son," Rachel declared triumphantly. This son gave Rachel hope that God had not forgotten her, and that she too could contribute to Jacob's lineage. Bilhah conceived again, and bore Jacob a second son, whom Rachel named Naphtali, meaning wrestling. "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and have prevailed," Rachel proclaimed. Her choice of name revealed that she saw her situation as a competition with Leah, rather than simply a desire for children. Meanwhile, Leah had stopped bearing children after Judah's birth, creating a temporary pause in the rivalry. But when she saw that Rachel was gaining children through Bilhah, she decided to employ the same strategy. "Here is my servant Zilpah," Leah said to Jacob. "Go into her as well." If Rachel could increase her family through a surrogate, Leah reasoned, then she could do the same. Zilpah conceived and bore Jacob a son, whom Leah named Gad, meaning fortune or luck. "Fortune has come," Leah exclaimed, pleased to be back in the competition for Jacob's attention through children. Zilpah bore Jacob another son, whom Leah named Asher, meaning happy or blessed. "Happy am I," Leah declared, "for women have called me happy," referring to her growing reputation as a mother. The competition between the sisters had now expanded to include their servants as surrogates. Jacob found himself with 6 sons from 4 different women, all within his own household. The complexity of his family situation was growing, and the tensions between his wives were escalating rather than diminishing. What had begun as a love story was becoming a tale of rivalry, desperation, and competing claims on Jacob's legacy. During the wheat harvest season, young Reuben, Leah's firstborn, made an unusual discovery in the fields. He found mandrakes, plants that were believed in ancient times to have fertility-enhancing properties. These plants, with their distinctive forked roots and reputation for promoting conception, were highly valued by women. Reuben brought the mandrakes to his mother Leah, perhaps knowing of her ongoing desire for more children. When Rachel saw the mandrakes, she immediately recognized their potential value for her own situation. "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes," Rachel asked Leah, her voice betraying her desperation. Leah's response revealed the depth of hurt and resentment that had built up over the years. "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband?" Leah replied with bitter honesty. "Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" she continued, expressing her frustration at losing to Rachel repeatedly. This confrontation brought to the surface the underlying tensions that had been simmering in the household. Leah felt that Rachel had stolen not just Jacob's love, but also his time and attention. Rachel, perhaps recognizing the validity of Leah's complaint, offered to make a bargain. "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes," Rachel proposed. This negotiation revealed how far their relationship had deteriorated. They were now bargaining for time with their shared husband. The fact that Rachel felt she had the authority to give Jacob to Leah for a night showed how completely he favored her. Leah agreed to the bargain, perhaps seeing it as a rare opportunity to have Jacob's undivided attention. When Jacob came home from the fields that evening, Leah met him with unusual boldness. "You must come in to me," she declared, "for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." Jacob agreed to honor the bargain his wives had made, though he may have found the situation awkward. That night, Jacob lay with Leah, and God blessed their union with conception. Leah bore Jacob a fifth son, whom she named Issachar, meaning wages or reward. "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband," Leah said, referring to her earlier gift of Zilpah. Her interpretation of events showed that she saw this child as divine compensation for her previous generosity. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son, whom she named Zebulun, meaning dwelling or honor. "God has endowed me with a good endowment," she declared. "Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons," she added, still hoping that her fertility would finally earn Jacob's love. After Zebulun's birth, Leah bore Jacob a daughter, whom she named Dinah. This daughter would play a significant role in later family history, though her story would be marked by tragedy. The birth of Dinah completed Leah's childbearing for the time being, giving her 7 children total. Meanwhile, Rachel had obtained the mandrakes she desired, but they seemed to have no effect on her barrenness. This reality must have been deeply disappointing to Rachel, who had hoped the plants would solve her problem. The competition between the sisters continued, but now it was clear that children came from God's blessing, not from human manipulation. After years of barrenness, and watching her sister bear child after child, Rachel's situation finally changed. Then God remembered Rachel, the ancient text records, using language that indicates divine intervention and compassion. This remembering by God doesn't mean he had forgotten Rachel, but rather that he chose this moment to act on her behalf. The timing of God's intervention was perfect, coming after Rachel had learned to depend on his grace rather than her own efforts. God listened to her and opened her womb, the text continues, emphasizing both divine hearing and action. Rachel's years of prayer and pleading had not been ignored, though the answer had been delayed for divine purposes. When Rachel conceived, her joy was overwhelming after so many years of disappointment and waiting. The pregnancy proceeded normally, and Rachel gave birth to a son, her first biological child. "God has taken away my reproach," Rachel declared, her voice filled with relief and gratitude. She named her son Joseph, meaning, "May he add," expressing her hope for additional children in the future. "May the Lord add to me another son," she said, her faith now strengthened by this divine blessing. The birth of Joseph brought great joy to Jacob, who had longed to see his beloved Rachel become a mother. This child was special to Jacob, not only because he was Rachel's son, but also because he was born of love. Joseph would grow up knowing he was particularly cherished by his father, a knowledge that would shape his character. The household dynamics shifted with Joseph's birth, as Rachel finally had a biological son to call her own. Leah watched these developments with mixed emotions, knowing that Rachel's son would likely be Jacob's favorite. The competition between the sisters had produced 11 sons and 1 daughter, forming the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. But with Joseph's birth, it became clear that this child would hold a special place in his father's heart. Jacob's joy at Joseph's birth was evident to everyone in the household, confirming Rachel's secure position as the favored wife. The boy would grow up in an environment of love and privilege, though this would eventually create problems with his older brothers. With Joseph's birth, Jacob began to feel a stirring in his heart to return to his homeland. He had now served Laban for 14 years, fulfilling his obligations for both Leah and Rachel. The vision at Bethel years earlier had included God's promise to bring him back to his father's land. Jacob approached Laban with his request, hoping to negotiate his departure from Haran peacefully. "Send me away that I may go to my own home and country," Jacob said formally. "Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go," he continued. "For you know the service that I have given you," Jacob added, reminding Laban of his faithful labor. Laban's response revealed his reluctance to lose such a valuable worker and his calculating nature. "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, stay," Laban pleaded, using diplomatic language. "I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you," he admitted. This confession revealed that Laban understood the source of his prosperity during Jacob's years of service. "Name your wages, and I will give it," Laban offered, hoping to retain Jacob's services. Jacob's response showed his wisdom and his understanding of Laban's character over the years. "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me," Jacob began, "for you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly," he continued. "And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned," Jacob added, acknowledging God's role in Laban's prosperity. "But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" Jacob asked, asserting his right to independence. Laban pressed for specifics, and Jacob proposed an arrangement that seemed to favor his uncle. "You shall not give me anything," Jacob said, surprising Laban with his apparent generosity. "If you will do this thing for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it," he offered. Jacob's proposal involved separating the speckled, spotted, and black animals from the flocks as his wages. "Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep," Jacob suggested, "and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats," he continued. "And such shall be my wages," Jacob concluded, proposing what seemed like a modest request. Laban agreed readily, thinking this arrangement would greatly favor him since most sheep were white. "Good. Let it be as you have said," Laban responded, perhaps thinking he was getting the better deal. But Jacob had learned much about animal husbandry during his years of service, and he had a plan. He understood genetics in a practical way, even if he couldn't explain the science behind it. More importantly, Jacob trusted that God would prosper him as he had promised at Bethel. The stage was set for Jacob's final test of faith and his preparation to return to Canaan. Jacob's plan for breeding livestock was both ingenious and controversial, blending practical knowledge with divine blessing. He took fresh rods of poplar, almond, and plane trees, peeling white stripes in them to create patterns. These peeled rods were placed in the watering troughs, where the animals came to drink and mate. Jacob believed that what the animals saw during conception would influence the appearance of their offspring. While modern science might question this method, the results Jacob achieved were undeniably successful. The stronger animals were bred in sight of the rods, while the weaker ones were bred without them. This selective breeding resulted in Jacob acquiring the stronger animals, while Laban kept the weaker ones. Within a few years, Jacob's portion of the flock had grown dramatically in both size and quality. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks. The text records describing Jacob's growing prosperity. He also acquired female servants and male servants and camels and donkeys, indicating substantial wealth. Jacob's success was so dramatic that it began to create tension with Laban's sons and household. They watched their father's wealth, apparently transferring to their cousin, with growing resentment and suspicion. "Jacob has taken all that was our father's," Laban's sons complained among themselves. "From what was our father's he has gained all this wealth," they continued, their jealousy becoming obvious. Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him had changed significantly from what it had been. Laban no longer looked at Jacob with the same warmth and welcome he had shown in earlier years. The relationship between the two men became strained as Jacob's prosperity increased. and Laban's relative wealth decreased. Jacob began to sense that his welcome in Haran was wearing thin, and that conflict was inevitable. During this tense period, the Lord appeared to Jacob in a dream, confirming his suspicions. "Return to the land of your fathers, and to your kindred," God commanded, "and I will be with you." This divine instruction gave Jacob the confirmation he needed to begin planning his departure from Haran. He had fulfilled his obligations to Laban and had built substantial wealth for his own family. The time had come to return to Canaan, though he knew the journey would be fraught with challenges. Jacob would need to deal with Laban's resistance to his departure and his own fears about facing Esau. But God's promise to be with him gave Jacob the courage to begin planning his return home. The vision at Bethel years earlier was finally coming to fruition, as God prepared to fulfill his promises. Jacob's transformation from a fleeing deceiver to a prosperous patriarch was nearly complete. The lessons learned through his years with Laban had prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. Jacob realized that leaving Haran openly would likely result in conflict with Laban and his sons. Their growing hostility made it clear that they would not willingly allow him to depart with his wealth. Jacob decided to call Rachel and Leah to the field where he could speak privately with them, away from the ears of servants and Laban's sons. Jacob could explain his plan honestly. "I see that your father's face is not toward me as it was before," Jacob began carefully. "But the God of my father has been with me," he continued, acknowledging divine protection. "You know that I have served your father with all my strength," Jacob reminded his wives. "Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times, he revealed, exposing Laban's deception. "But God did not permit him to harm me," Jacob added, giving credit to divine intervention. Jacob then described his dream, in which God had revealed Laban's injustice and commanded his return. "I am the God of Bethel," the Lord had said in the dream, "where you anointed a pillar. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred," God had commanded. Rachel and Leah's response revealed their own frustration with their father's treatment of them. "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house?" they asked rhetorically. "Are we not regarded by him as foreigners?" they continued, expressing their sense of alienation. "For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money," they concluded bitterly. Their father had used them as payment for Jacob's labor, and had kept the bride price for himself. "All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children," they declared. "Now then, whatever God has said to you, do," they concluded, giving Jacob their full support. With his wife's blessing, Jacob began to make preparations for their secret departure from Haran. He waited for an opportune moment when Laban would be away from home for several days. When Laban went to shear his sheep, a process that would keep him occupied for an extended period, Jacob acted. He loaded his wives and children on camels and gathered all his livestock and possessions. Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing, the text records. The irony was not lost. Jacob, who had been deceived by Laban, was now deceiving him in return. Rachel, perhaps motivated by resentment toward her father, stole Laban's household gods as they departed. These small idols, called teraphim, were valuable both religiously and legally in ancient culture. Possession of household gods often indicated inheritance rights, making Rachel's theft particularly significant. Jacob's entire household departed secretly, crossing the Euphrates River and heading toward the hill country of Gilead. They had a 3-day head start before Laban discovered their departure and began pursuit. The escape was successful, but Jacob knew that Laban would not give up easily. The confrontation that had been building for years was now inevitable, and Jacob prepared for the worst. When Laban returned from shearing his sheep, he discovered that Jacob and his entire household had vanished. The livestock, the servants, the wives, the children, everything was gone without a trace or explanation. Laban's anger was immediate and intense. Feeling betrayed by Jacob's secret departure after years of partnership, he gathered his kinsmen and pursued Jacob with the determination of a man seeking justice. The pursuit lasted 7 days, with Laban's party traveling quickly to catch up with Jacob's slower-moving household. Jacob's company was slowed by children, flocks, and possessions, making them vulnerable to Laban's faster pursuit. As Laban drew closer to Jacob's location in the hill country of Gilead, God intervened dramatically. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night, the text records, and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad," God warned. This divine warning was crucial, as it prevented Laban from using force or manipulation against Jacob. God's protection of Jacob was evident, fulfilling his promise to be with him wherever he went. The next morning, Laban caught up with Jacob's camp, which was pitched on a mountain in Gilead. Laban and his men also made camp on the same mountain, setting the stage for their confrontation. The meeting between the two men was tense, with years of accumulated grievances about to surface. "What have you done?" Laban demanded. "That you have deceived me and carried away my daughters like captives of the sword." Laban's accusation revealed his anger at being deceived, and his view of his daughters as his property. "Why did you flee secretly and deceive me, and did not tell me?" he continued his complaint. "So that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre," he claimed. This statement was likely false, given Laban's obvious reluctance to let Jacob leave earlier. "And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell?" Laban asked. "Now you have done foolishly," he concluded, though his tone was restrained by God's warning. "It is in my power to do you harm," Laban admitted, revealing his original intentions. "But the God of your father spoke to me last night," he acknowledged, admitting the divine intervention, saying, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad," he confessed. This admission revealed that Laban understood he was dealing with someone under divine protection. "And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house," Laban said. "But why did you steal my gods?" he demanded, not knowing that Rachel had taken them. This accusation about the stolen household gods would lead to the most dramatic moment of the confrontation. Jacob's response would reveal his own anger and his ignorance of Rachel's theft. Jacob's response to Laban's accusation was immediate and filled with righteous indignation at the charges. "Because I was afraid," Jacob admitted, "for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force." This fear was not unreasonable, given Laban's possessive attitude toward his daughters and his obvious reluctance to let Jacob leave. "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live," Jacob declared boldly, not knowing about Rachel's theft. This rash oath would have condemned his beloved wife to death if the gods had been discovered. "In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it," Jacob continued. Jacob's confidence in his innocence regarding the stolen gods was absolute, making his oath particularly dangerous. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them, the text explains, highlighting the irony. Laban began his search systematically, starting with Jacob's tent, and then moving to Leah's tent. He searched through the belongings of both of Jacob's wives, but found nothing suspicious. Next, he searched the tent of the two female servants, Bilhah and Zilpah, but again found nothing. Finally, Laban came to Rachel's tent, where the stolen household gods were hidden. Rachel had taken the gods and put them in the camel's saddle, then sat upon them. When Laban entered her tent to search, Rachel employed a clever deception to avoid discovery. "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you," she said to her father. "For the way of women is upon me," she explained, claiming to be menstruating. This claim made her ceremonially unclean according to ancient customs, discouraging close examination. Laban searched the tent, but did not find the gods, as Rachel sat calmly on the saddle, concealing them. Her deception was successful, and Laban left her tent empty-handed and increasingly frustrated. The failure to find the stolen gods, despite his thorough search, weakened Laban's position considerably. Jacob's anger now erupted, as he felt vindicated by the unsuccessful search and years of mistreatment. "What is my transgression? What is my sin, that you have hotly pursued me?" Jacob demanded. "Although you have felt through all my goods, what have you found of all your household goods?" he continued. "Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two," Jacob challenged. Jacob then launched into a detailed defense of his 20 years of faithful service to Laban. "These 20 years I have been with you," he began, recounting his long and faithful service. "Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you," Jacob continued, describing his exceptional care. "I bore the loss of it myself," he added, explaining how he had gone beyond normal shepherding duties. "From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night," Jacob recalled. "There I was, by day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night," he described his hardships. "And my sleep fled from my eyes," Jacob concluded, emphasizing his dedication and sacrifice. Jacob's passionate defense of his service continued, as he catalogued 20 years of faithful labour. "These 20 years I have been in your house," he reminded Laban with increasing intensity. "I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock," he detailed. "And you have changed my wages 10 times, Jacob accused, revealing the extent of Laban's deception. This public accounting of their relationship exposed Laban's unfair treatment before all their kinsmen. "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side," Jacob declared, "surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed," he continued, acknowledging divine protection. "God saw my affliction and the labour of my hands and rebuked you last night," Jacob concluded. Laban's response revealed his weakened position and his desire to end the conflict peacefully. "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks," he claimed. "And all that you see is mine," Laban asserted, though his words lacked conviction. "But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne?" he asked. This question acknowledged that his daughters had made their choice to go with Jacob. "Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I," Laban proposed, seeking a peaceful resolution. "And let it be a witness between you and me," he continued. Understanding the need for formal agreement, Jacob agreed to make a covenant, and they began to set up a memorial of their agreement. Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, creating a permanent marker of their covenant. "Gather stones," Jacob commanded his kinsmen, and they made a heap of stones beside the pillar, and they ate there by the heap, sharing a covenant meal to seal their agreement. Laban called the heap Jagar Sahadutha in his Aramaic language, meaning heap of witness. Jacob called it Galid in Hebrew, which has the same meaning, showing their different languages but shared intent. "This heap is a witness between you and me today," Laban declared, explaining the monument's significance. The place was also called Mizpah, meaning watchtower, because of the covenant made there. "The Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from the other," Laban said. This blessing became known as the Mizpah benediction, though it was actually a warning about mutual surveillance. "If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters," Laban warned, "although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me," he continued. The covenant included specific terms about the treatment of Laban's daughters and future contact between the families. "This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness," Laban emphasized, "that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me for harm." The agreement essentially established a boundary that neither party would cross with hostile intent. "The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us," Laban invoked. Jacob swore by the fear of Isaac, his father's God, sealing the covenant with a sacred oath. Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain to solemnize the covenant and acknowledge God's role in their agreement. He called his kinsmen to eat bread together, sharing a meal that sealed their peaceful resolution. The shared meal was significant in ancient culture, representing fellowship and mutual commitment to the agreement. They spent the night on the mountain, their first peaceful rest together in years. Early in the morning, Laban rose to bid farewell to his daughters and grandchildren. He kissed his daughters and his grandchildren, blessing them with the affection of a father and grandfather. This moment was bittersweet, as Laban knew he would likely never see them again. The blessing was both a farewell and a prayer for their future happiness and prosperity. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. The text records, marking the end of his role in Jacob's story. This parting represented the end of an era in Jacob's life, and the beginning of a new chapter. Jacob had successfully navigated the challenges of living with Laban, and had emerged with his family and wealth intact. The 20 years in Haran had transformed Jacob from a fleeing deceiver into a prosperous patriarch. He had learned valuable lessons about integrity, perseverance, and trusting in God's promises. Most importantly, he had established a family that would become the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Leah had given him 6 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, plus daughter Dinah. Rachel had given him 1 son, Joseph, who was particularly beloved by Jacob. Through their servants, Jacob had gained 4 additional sons: Dan and Naphtali through Bilhah, Gad and Asher through Zilpah. These 11 sons would become the patriarchs of 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12th tribe would come from Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who would be born in Egypt. As Jacob prepared to continue his journey toward Canaan, he faced new challenges and uncertainties. The confrontation with Laban was behind him, but ahead lay the potentially more dangerous meeting with his brother Esau. 20 years had passed since Jacob had fled from Esau's anger, and he didn't know if his brother's fury had cooled. The promises God had made at Bethel were being fulfilled, but the path to their complete fulfillment was still unclear. Jacob's faith had grown through his experiences with Laban, but it would be tested even more severely in the days ahead. The story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel was far from over. Though the Haran chapter had concluded, their legacy would continue through their children and their children's children for generations to come. As Jacob journeyed toward his homeland, he was met by angels of God at a place he named Mahanaim. "This is God's camp," Jacob declared upon seeing the heavenly host, recognizing divine protection. But as he drew closer to the land of Canaan, Jacob's anxiety about meeting Esau grew overwhelming. He sent messengers ahead to his brother in the land of Seir, hoping to gauge Esau's disposition. The messengers returned with news that filled Jacob with terror. Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. This news seemed to confirm Jacob's worst fears about his brother's continuing anger and desire for revenge. Jacob's response revealed both his practical wisdom and his growing faith in God's protection. He divided his people and possessions into 2 camps, reasoning that if Esau attacked one, the other might escape. Then Jacob prayed earnestly to God, reminding him of his promises and pleading for deliverance. "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac," Jacob began his desperate prayer. "O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good,'" he continued. "I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant." Jacob's prayer showed his humility and his recognition of God's grace in his life. He prepared an elaborate gift for Esau, hoping to appease his brother's anger through generous presents. Hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, cattle, and donkeys were selected as a peace offering. Jacob sent these gifts ahead in separate droves, instructing his servants to tell Esau they belonged to "your servant Jacob." That night, Jacob sent his wives, children, and servants across the ford of the Jabbok River. He remained alone on the other side, perhaps to pray or to prepare himself mentally for the meeting with Esau. And Jacob was left alone, the text records setting the stage for the most significant event of his life. "And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day," begins the account of Jacob's mysterious encounter. The identity of this man becomes clear as the story unfolds. It was God himself in human form. The wrestling match was both physical and spiritual, representing Jacob's struggle with his own character and destiny. Throughout the night, Jacob wrestled with all his strength, refusing to give up despite his exhaustion. When the mysterious wrestler saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched Jacob's hip socket. Jacob's hip was put out of joint, but still he would not release his hold on his opponent. "Let me go, for the day is breaking," the man said. But Jacob refused to release him. "I will not let you go unless you bless me," Jacob declared, showing his determination to receive divine blessing. The request for blessing revealed Jacob's understanding that this was no ordinary man he was wrestling with. "What is your name?" the man asked. And Jacob replied, "Jacob, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel," the man declared, giving him a new identity. "For you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." He explained the meaning of the new name. Israel means "he who strives with God," or "God strives," marking Jacob's transformation from deceiver to one who prevails through faith. Jacob, now renamed Israel, crossed the Jabbok River at dawn, limping from his wrestling match with God. His encounter with the divine had transformed him, giving him new confidence and a new identity. As he rejoined his family, Jacob could see Esau approaching in the distance with his 400 men. The moment Jacob had feared for 20 years was finally at hand, the confrontation with his brother. Jacob arranged his family strategically, placing the servants and their children first, then Leah and her children, and finally Rachel and Joseph. This arrangement protected his most beloved family members, while showing respect for his brother's approach. Jacob himself went ahead of them all, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached Esau. This prostration was a sign of humility and respect, showing Jacob's desire for reconciliation rather than conflict. But Esau's response was completely unexpected and overwhelmingly gracious to his long-lost brother. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. The reunion was emotional and healing, washing away 20 years of separation and resentment. Esau's heart had been changed over the years, and he no longer harbored anger toward his brother. "Who are these with you?" Esau asked, looking at Jacob's large family with curiosity and wonder. "The children whom God has graciously given your servant," Jacob replied, introducing his wives and children. The servants approached with their children and bowed down, followed by Leah and her children, and finally Rachel and Joseph. Each group showed respect to Esau, acknowledging his status as Jacob's older brother. "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Esau asked, referring to the gifts Jacob had sent ahead. "To find favor in the sight of my Lord," Jacob answered, explaining his generous peace offering. "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself," Esau replied generously. But Jacob insisted that Esau accept the gifts, seeing his brother's gracious reception as a sign of divine favor. "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand," Jacob pleaded. "For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God," he added, referring to the grace he had received. "And you have received me favorably," Jacob continued, acknowledging Esau's unexpected kindness. "Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me," he explained. "And because I have enough," Jacob concluded, showing that he too had prospered during their separation. Jacob urged Esau repeatedly until he finally accepted the gifts, cementing their reconciliation. Esau suggested that they travel together, but Jacob declined, citing the slow pace needed for his flocks and children. "Let my lord pass on ahead of his servant," Jacob said diplomatically, "and I will lead on slowly, at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my lord in Seir," Jacob promised, though he would not actually make this journey. The brothers parted peacefully, with Esau returning to Seir and Jacob continuing toward Canaan. The reconciliation was complete, fulfilling God's promise to protect Jacob and bring him safely home. After the emotional reunion with Esau, Jacob continued his journey deeper into the land of Canaan. He came to a place called Succoth, where he built a house for himself and shelters for his livestock. The name Succoth means booths or shelters, commemorating Jacob's temporary dwelling place there. This stop represented a period of rest and reorganization after the intense experiences of recent days. Jacob's family needed time to recover from the long journey and to adjust to being back in Canaan. The children, especially the younger ones, required stability after months of travel and uncertainty. From Succoth, Jacob moved on to a city called Shechem, which was in the land of Canaan. He purchased a piece of land from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. This purchase was significant because it represented Jacob's first acquisition of property in the promised land. The land would serve as a temporary home for his large family and growing flocks. Jacob erected an altar there and called it El Elohe Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel. This altar commemorated God's faithfulness in bringing him safely back to Canaan and his own transformation. The name also reflected his new identity as Israel, the one who had wrestled with God and prevailed. The altar served as a place of worship and thanksgiving for God's protection and provision. Jacob's family began to establish themselves in this new location, learning the local customs and making connections with neighboring peoples. The land around Shechem was fertile and suitable for both agriculture and livestock grazing. Jacob's flocks multiplied, and his household prospered in this new environment. Leah and Rachel adapted to their new surroundings, managing their households and raising their children. The boys grew and learned the skills they would need as future leaders of their father's people. Joseph, as Jacob's favorite son, received special attention and began to develop the qualities that would later make him a great leader. The family's presence in Shechem was generally peaceful, though they remained somewhat separate from the local population. Jacob was careful to maintain his family's distinct identity while living harmoniously with their neighbors. The altar at Shechem became a regular place of worship and a reminder of God's faithfulness. Jacob would often gather his family there to offer sacrifices and to teach them about their God. The stories of Abraham and Isaac were passed down to the next generation, preserving the family's spiritual heritage. Jacob's wives and children learned about the promises God had made to their ancestors. The covenant made with Abraham was being fulfilled through Jacob's growing family. Each of Jacob's sons would eventually become the patriarch of a tribe in Israel. The foundation was being laid for the nation that would carry God's promises to the world. But even in this time of relative peace, challenges lay ahead for Jacob's family. The complex dynamics between his wives and children would continue to create tension. The favoritism Jacob showed to Joseph would eventually lead to family crisis, and the family's relationship with their neighbors would be tested in ways they could not anticipate. After settling in the land of Canaan, Jacob's family continued to grow and establish themselves. God had blessed Jacob with 11 sons and 1 daughter, but his beloved Rachel had given him only 1 son, Joseph. Despite her earlier struggles with barrenness, Rachel conceived again, bringing great joy to Jacob's heart. The pregnancy progressed normally at first, and Rachel looked forward to giving Jacob another son. But as the time for birth approached, complications arose that would change everything. Rachel went into labor while the family was traveling from Bethel toward Ephrath, later known as Bethlehem. The labor was difficult and prolonged, causing great distress to both Rachel and those attending her. Ancient midwifery had limited resources to deal with complications, making difficult births extremely dangerous. As Rachel struggled in her labor, it became clear that this birth would be different from Joseph's. The midwife tried to encourage Rachel, saying, "Do not fear, for you have another son." These words would have brought comfort to Rachel, who had longed for additional children. But Rachel's strength was failing, and she seemed to sense that her time was ending. With her dying breath, she named her son Ben-Oni, meaning, "son of my sorrow." This name reflected Rachel's pain and her awareness that she was dying in childbirth. But Jacob could not bear to have his son carry a name associated with such tragedy. He renamed the boy Benjamin, meaning "son of my right hand" or "son of the south." This name spoke of honor and strength, reflecting Jacob's hopes for his youngest son. Rachel died in childbirth, and Jacob's heart was broken by the loss of his beloved wife. The woman he had worked 14 years to marry, the love of his life, was gone. Jacob buried Rachel on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem, setting up a pillar over her grave. This is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day, the ancient text records. The monument served as a permanent memorial to Rachel's life and Jacob's enduring love for her. Rachel's death left Jacob with 12 sons, but without the woman who had captured his heart so completely. Joseph and Benjamin were now motherless, though they would be cared for by the household. Jacob's grief was profound, and he would carry the weight of this loss for the remainder of his days. The patriarch, who had wrestled with God, now found himself wrestling with crushing sorrow that threatened to overwhelm his spirit. In the immediate aftermath of Rachel's death, the entire household was thrown into mourning for their beloved mistress. Leah, despite her years of rivalry with Rachel, wept for her sister wife, understanding the pain of loving Jacob. The servants and concubines who had witnessed Rachel's beauty and grace throughout the years felt the loss deeply. She had been kind to them even in her moments of greatest personal anguish and heartbreak. The older sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, watched their father's grief with a mixture of compassion and concern. They had seen Jacob's preferential treatment of Rachel and her son Joseph, which had sometimes caused resentment, yet they could not help but feel moved by the depth of his sorrow and genuine love. Reuben, as the eldest, took it upon himself to help organize the household during this time of crisis. He ensured that the flocks were tended and the family's needs were met while Jacob mourned his beloved. The birth of Benjamin, though it should have been a time of celebration, was overshadowed by tragedy. The infant, unaware of the cost of his entrance into the world, would grow up knowing a difficult truth. His very existence was tied to his mother's sacrifice, a burden that would shape his character forever. This knowledge would create in him a sensitivity and depth that set him apart from his brothers. Jacob's relationship with his newborn son was complex from the beginning, filled with both love and pain. Every time he looked at Benjamin, he saw Rachel's face reflected in the child's delicate features and expressions. The boy had her eyes, her gentle smile, and the same graceful way of moving that had captivated Jacob. But these resemblances, while precious, also served as constant reminders of what he had lost that day. The weight of raising Benjamin without Rachel seemed almost unbearable to Jacob in those early months of grief. How could he nurture this child who looked so much like his mother without Rachel's guidance and love? The other wives and servants did their best to help care for the infant, but none could replace Rachel. Benjamin's early months were marked by Jacob's struggle between cherishing his youngest son and mourning his wife. Sometimes Jacob would hold Benjamin close, seeing in him the continuation of Rachel's legacy and love. Other times the resemblance was too painful, and Jacob would retreat into solitude, leaving others to care. Joseph, now a young boy himself, watched his father's grief with growing understanding and protectiveness toward Benjamin. He had loved his mother deeply and felt responsible for his new brother, who would never know her. The bond between Joseph and Benjamin would grow stronger because of this shared loss they both carried. Meanwhile, the other sons observed their father's continued favoritism toward Rachel's children with mixed feelings of understanding. They could see that Jacob's love for Benjamin was intertwined with his grief for Rachel in ways. This created a complex dynamic within the family that would have lasting consequences for years to come. As the months passed, Jacob slowly began to emerge from the depths of his initial grief and sorrow. He realized that Benjamin needed his full attention and love, not just the shadow of his mother. The child deserved to be valued for who he was, not just as a living reminder of Rachel. Jacob began to spend more time with Benjamin, teaching him simple words and watching him take steps. He told him stories about his mother Rachel, painting a picture of her beauty, kindness, and strength. Benjamin would grow up knowing that his mother had been deeply loved and had died bringing him. This knowledge would instill in him both a sense of honor and a deep appreciation for life. Jacob also made sure that Benjamin understood his place in the family as the youngest of 12 brothers. Each brother had their own unique qualities and roles within the household, and Benjamin would find his. As Benjamin grew from infant to toddler, his personality began to emerge in ways that delighted Jacob. The boy showed signs of intelligence and curiosity, often asking questions about everything around him in simplicity. He had a gentle nature that reminded Jacob of Rachel, but also a strength that was uniquely his. Benjamin seemed to have an intuitive understanding of others' emotions, perhaps developed from growing up around grief. He would often approach Jacob when his father seemed sad, and simply sit quietly beside him. This quiet companionship brought Jacob more comfort than any words could have provided in those difficult days. The other brothers gradually began to warm to Benjamin, as he grew and developed his own distinct personality. Unlike Joseph, who sometimes seemed to invite jealousy through his dreams, and Jacob's obvious favoritism, Benjamin was different. He had a humble spirit and seemed unaware of any special treatment he might receive from father. This humility would serve him well in the years to come and help him navigate family dynamics. As Benjamin learned to walk and talk, he became a source of joy and renewed hope for Jacob. The child's laughter could lift Jacob's spirits, even on the darkest days of remembering his beloved Rachel. Benjamin's presence reminded Jacob that life continued, that there was still beauty and wonder to be found. The boy's innocence and curiosity about the world helped Jacob see things through fresh eyes once again. Jacob began to teach Benjamin about their family history, starting with stories of Abraham and Isaac before. He told him about God's promises to their family and the covenant that bound them to the Almighty. Benjamin listened with wide eyes, absorbing these tales that would shape his understanding of faith and heritage. Jacob also taught him practical skills, showing him how to care for sheep and goats in pastures. The boy showed natural aptitude for animal husbandry, seeming to have inherited Jacob's gift with livestock care. Benjamin's gentle manner with animals reflected the same kindness his mother had shown to all living creatures. As the years passed, the pain of Rachel's death remained with Jacob, but it transformed into something different. The sharp, overwhelming grief gradually became a deep, abiding love that honored her memory through their son. Jacob realized that the best way to honor Rachel was to raise Benjamin with love, wisdom, and faith. He would ensure that Benjamin grew up to be a man of character, worthy of his mother's sacrifice. The pillar Jacob had erected over Rachel's grave became a place of pilgrimage for the family periodically. They would visit to remember Rachel, to honor her memory, and to teach the children about her. Benjamin would stand at his mother's grave, listening to stories about the woman who had given life. These visits helped him understand his connection to Rachel and the love that had brought him forth. Jacob often reflected on the irony that his greatest joy and deepest sorrow were forever intertwined in Benjamin. The son who had cost him his beloved wife had also become one of his greatest sources of comfort. This paradox taught Jacob deeper truths about love, loss, and the mysterious ways of God's providence in life. He learned that sometimes the most precious gifts come at the highest cost, requiring great sacrifice and courage. Benjamin grew up knowing that he was loved not just for himself, but as a living connection to Rachel. This knowledge gave him a unique perspective on the value of life and the importance of love. He understood from an early age that every moment was precious, that relationships were worth sacrificing for. The boy developed a deep appreciation for family bonds and the ways that love transcends even death. As Benjamin entered his teenage years, his resemblance to Rachel became even more pronounced and striking. Jacob would sometimes stop in mid-sentence, startled by a gesture or expression that was purely Rachel's spirit. But these moments no longer brought only pain. They brought a sweet remembrance of his beloved wife. Benjamin had become a bridge between past and present, between memory and hope for the future ahead. The young man showed wisdom beyond his years, often serving as a peacemaker among his brothers. His gentle nature and intuitive understanding of others made him a natural mediator in family disputes. Benjamin's brothers respected him not just as the youngest, but as someone who truly cared about harmony. This role would prove invaluable in the trials that lay ahead for Jacob's family in coming years. Jacob recognized that Benjamin had been shaped by his unusual circumstances into someone truly special and unique. The boy who had been born in sorrow had become a source of hope and healing for everyone. His presence reminded the family that even in tragedy, God could bring forth beauty and new life. Benjamin embodied the truth that love continues beyond death, that sacrifice can create lasting blessings for generations. As Jacob grew older, he took comfort in knowing that Benjamin would carry Rachel's memory forward faithfully. The son born of sorrow had become a beacon of hope, a testament to enduring love's power. Through Benjamin, Rachel's spirit lived on, blessing Jacob's family with her gentleness, wisdom, and grace throughout generations. The boy who had been named Son of My Right Hand had indeed become Jacob's strength and comfort. As Benjamin reached his 16th year, Jacob began to see the man his youngest son would become. The boy had grown tall and strong, with Rachel's gentle features, but a quiet strength that was uniquely his. Benjamin's voice had deepened, and he carried himself with the confidence of one who knew his place. Yet he remained humble, never presuming upon his father's obvious affection or his special position in family. Jacob decided it was time to begin preparing Benjamin for greater responsibilities within the household and beyond. The education of a patriarch's son required knowledge of many things: leadership, wisdom, faith, and practical skills. Benjamin had already mastered the care of sheep and goats, showing natural ability with the family's livestock. Now Jacob would teach him about trade, negotiation, and the complex relationships between neighboring peoples and tribes. The first lesson came when merchants from distant lands arrived at Jacob's encampment, seeking to trade goods. Jacob brought Benjamin to observe the negotiations, teaching him to read the subtle signs of honesty and deception. "Watch their eyes," Jacob whispered to his son, as the merchants displayed their wares with flourishing gestures. "An honest man looks directly at you when he speaks, but a deceiver's eyes dart around nervously." Benjamin absorbed these lessons eagerly, understanding that his father was preparing him for important future responsibilities and roles. The young man showed remarkable insight, often asking questions that revealed a deeper understanding of human nature. "Why do some men smile with their mouths but not their eyes?" Benjamin asked after the merchants departed. Jacob smiled at his son's perceptiveness, pleased that Benjamin was learning to discern truth from mere appearance. These trading encounters became regular opportunities for Benjamin to learn about commerce and the ways of men. He discovered that successful negotiation required patience, wisdom, and the ability to understand what others truly desired. Benjamin's natural gentleness served him well in these interactions, as people found him trustworthy and approachable always. Unlike some of his brothers who could be harsh or demanding, Benjamin had learned diplomacy and kindness. As Benjamin matured, his relationships with his 11 brothers became increasingly complex and meaningful in unexpected ways. Each brother had their own personality, and Benjamin learned to navigate these differences with growing skill and wisdom. Reuben, the eldest, had always been protective of Benjamin, perhaps feeling responsible for the younger brother's well-being. He would often seek Benjamin's counsel when family disputes arose, valuing his youngest brother's peaceful perspective on matters. Simeon and Levi, known for their fierce tempers, surprisingly softened in Benjamin's presence and showed remarkable patience. The young man had a calming influence that seemed to bring out the better angels of their nature. Judah, who had emerged as a natural leader among the brothers, recognized Benjamin's wisdom despite his youth. He would often include Benjamin in discussions about family matters, respecting his insights and thoughtful contributions to conversations. The sons of the concubines Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher appreciated Benjamin's lack of pretension and genuine interest in them. Unlike Joseph, who sometimes seemed to set himself apart, Benjamin made each brother feel valued and heard. Issachar and Zebulun, Leah's youngest sons, found in Benjamin a kindred spirit who understood their position. They formed a close bond, often working together in the fields and sharing their hopes and dreams. But it was with Joseph that Benjamin shared the deepest connection, forged by their shared loss and love. Joseph had become like a second father to Benjamin, teaching him things that Jacob sometimes overlooked or forgot. The brothers would spend hours talking about their mother Rachel, sharing memories and imagining what she might say. Joseph would describe Rachel's laughter, her gentle songs, and the way she had loved both her sons unconditionally. These conversations helped Benjamin feel connected to the mother he had never known, but always carried within. Joseph also shared his dreams with Benjamin, the vivid visions that came to him in sleep regularly. "I dreamed that we were binding sheaves in the field," Joseph would tell his younger brother quietly. "Suddenly my sheaf stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to mine, brother." Benjamin listened to these dreams with concern, understanding instinctively that they might create problems with their other brothers. "Perhaps it would be wise to keep such dreams to yourself," Benjamin gently advised his older brother. But Joseph felt compelled to share his visions, believing they came from God and must be spoken aloud. Benjamin watched with growing unease as Joseph's dreams began to create tension within the family circle. The other brothers resented the implication that Joseph would rule over them, and their jealousy grew stronger daily. Benjamin found himself caught between his love for Joseph and his desire to maintain family harmony. He tried to serve as a mediator, helping his brothers understand Joseph's dreams without taking offense unnecessarily. But the seeds of discord had been planted, and Benjamin could sense that trouble was coming soon. Jacob's advanced age brought new challenges to the family, and Benjamin found himself taking on increased responsibilities. The old patriarch still grieved for Rachel, but his love for Benjamin had helped heal some wounds. Jacob began to speak more openly about his own mortality and the future of the family. "You are my youngest son," Jacob told Benjamin one evening as they sat by the fire. "But age does not determine worth, and God often chooses the least likely to do great things." Benjamin listened respectfully, understanding that his father was trying to prepare him for an uncertain future ahead. Jacob spoke of Abraham and Isaac, of the promises God had made to their family through generations. "We are not just shepherds and traders," Jacob explained with passion in his aging voice. "We are the chosen people, carriers of God's covenant, destined for purposes greater than we can imagine." Benjamin felt the weight of this heritage settling upon his shoulders, like a heavy but honorable mantle. He understood that being Jacob's son meant more than privilege. It meant responsibility to God and future generations. The young man began to spend more time in prayer, seeking God's guidance for his life. Unlike Joseph's dramatic dreams, Benjamin's faith was quieter, but no less deep or meaningful to him. He found God in the simple moments: sunrise over the flocks, the birth of new lambs. Benjamin's spirituality was practical, grounded in daily service and care for others rather than grand visions. This approach to faith would serve him well in the trials that lay ahead for their family. Jacob recognized this mature spirituality in his youngest son and found it deeply comforting and reassuring. "Rachel would be proud of the man you've become," Jacob often told Benjamin during their evening talks. These words meant more to Benjamin than any material inheritance could have, filling his heart with purpose. He vowed to honor his mother's memory by living a life worthy of her sacrifice and love. As Benjamin entered his 18th year, the family dynamics began to shift in ways that troubled him. Joseph's dreams had become more frequent and more specific, often involving the entire family bowing before him. The latest dream particularly disturbed everyone: the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to Joseph's star. Even Jacob rebuked Joseph for this dream, though Benjamin noticed his father seemed thoughtful afterward, perhaps remembering something. The other brothers' resentment toward Joseph had reached a dangerous level, and Benjamin could feel the tension building. Conversations would stop when Joseph entered a room, and his brothers would exchange meaningful glances behind his back. Benjamin tried to warn Joseph about the growing hostility, but his brother seemed oblivious to the danger. "God has chosen me for something special," Joseph would say with innocent confidence that worried Benjamin deeply. "But surely God doesn't want us to be divided as a family," Benjamin would respond with concern. Joseph would just smile and pat his younger brother's shoulder, dismissing Benjamin's concerns as unnecessary worry about nothing. The favoritism Jacob showed toward Joseph became more pronounced as the patriarch aged and grew more sentimental. The coat of many colors that Jacob made for Joseph was beautiful, but it became a symbol. Every time Joseph wore it, his brothers were reminded of their father's preferential treatment and their own position. Benjamin watched this unfold with growing dread. Understanding that something terrible was going to happen to their family, he began to pray more fervently, asking God to protect Joseph and preserve their family unity. But Benjamin also sensed that these events were part of some larger plan he couldn't fully comprehend. The young man found himself caught between his love for Joseph and his understanding of his brother's pain. He could see both sides of the conflict, which made his position even more difficult and painful. Benjamin began to spend more time with his father, sensing that Jacob needed support during this troubling time. The old man seemed to age more rapidly, as if the family tensions were weighing heavily upon him. "I fear for our family's future," Jacob confided to Benjamin one evening as they walked among the flocks. "God has blessed us greatly, but our unity is fracturing, and I don't know how to repair it." Benjamin offered what comfort he could, but he shared his father's concerns about the gathering storm clouds. The young man felt a growing sense of responsibility to hold the family together somehow, despite his youth. But some forces were too powerful for even Benjamin's gentle influence to overcome or control effectively. The morning that would change everything began like any other, with Benjamin helping his father tend to business. Jacob had decided to send Joseph to check on his brothers, who were pasturing the flocks near Dothan. Benjamin felt a chill of foreboding as he watched his father prepare Joseph for the journey ahead. "Take this food to your brothers," Jacob instructed, seemingly unaware of the danger he was creating. "Bring me word of how they and the flocks are faring in the distant pastures." Benjamin wanted to speak up, to warn his father about the brothers' animosity, but he held his tongue. Perhaps he was wrong about the danger. Perhaps his brothers would welcome Joseph's visit after all these months. But as Joseph departed wearing his colourful coat, Benjamin felt a deep unease settle in his stomach. The young man spent the day in anxious prayer, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible happened. When evening came without Joseph's return, Benjamin's concern grew into genuine fear for his brother's safety. Jacob paced the camp restlessly, also sensing that something was amiss, but trying to remain calm. "Perhaps they moved the flocks to better pasture," Jacob suggested, though his voice betrayed his worry. Benjamin nodded, but privately he feared that Joseph had encountered the very hostility he had warned against. The next day brought no word from Joseph or the other brothers, and Jacob's anxiety became palpable. Benjamin found his father staring toward the horizon, as if willing Joseph to appear on the distant hills. "Should we send someone to look for them?" Benjamin asked, though he dreaded what such a search might reveal. Jacob considered this, but decided to wait another day, hoping for word from his sons about their location. But Benjamin could see the fear growing in his father's eyes, the same fear that gnawed at him. The young man spent another sleepless night, praying for Joseph's safety and his family's welfare desperately. On the third day, Benjamin's worst fears were confirmed when his brothers returned without Joseph among them. Their faces were grim, and they carried Joseph's coat torn and bloodied as evidence of his supposed fate. "We found this," Reuben announced, holding up the ruined garment with what seemed like genuine grief. "A wild beast must have devoured him. Joseph is dead, and we could not save him." Jacob's anguish was immediate and overwhelming, a cry of grief that echoed across the entire camp. Benjamin felt his world shatter as he watched his father collapse, overcome by the loss of his beloved son. The young man looked at his brothers' faces, searching for the truth behind their carefully constructed story. Something in their eyes told him that Joseph's death was not what it seemed, but he couldn't prove it. Benjamin found himself thrust into a new role as his father's primary comfort and support during this tragedy. The young man who had been protected and cherished now became the protector of his grieving father's spirit. In the wake of Joseph's disappearance, Benjamin's relationship with his father changed dramatically and permanently. Jacob, devastated by the loss of his favoured son, turned to Benjamin with an almost desperate affection. The young man became the sole link to Rachel's memory, the only reminder of his beloved wife. Jacob's grief was so profound that he refused to be comforted by anyone except Benjamin's gentle presence. "You are all I have left of her," Jacob would whisper, clinging to his youngest son. Benjamin felt the weight of this responsibility settling upon his shoulders, like a heavy mantle of duty. He understood that his father's emotional survival now depended largely upon his continued presence and support. The young man accepted this role with characteristic grace, though it meant sacrificing much of his freedom. Benjamin could no longer range freely with the flocks, or spend carefree days with his brothers learning new skills. Instead, he stayed close to Jacob, providing the comfort and companionship that his father desperately needed for survival. The other brothers watched this transformation with mixed emotions, understanding but perhaps resenting Benjamin's new position of favor. Yet they also recognized that Benjamin had not sought this role. It had been thrust upon him. Unlike Joseph, who had seemed to revel in their father's favoritism, Benjamin bore it as a burden. The young man's humility in the face of preference actually endeared him to his brothers rather than alienating them. Benjamin became Jacob's constant companion, listening to endless stories about Rachel and Joseph with patient attention. He learned details about his mother that no one else knew, treasuring these glimpses into her character. Jacob would describe Rachel's laugh, her way of singing while she worked, her gentle manner with children. These conversations helped Benjamin feel connected to the mother he had never known, but always mourned privately. In return, Benjamin shared his own memories and thoughts, becoming Jacob's confidant in ways that surprised them both. The young man's wisdom and maturity had developed rapidly under the pressure of his new responsibilities and expectations. Jacob began to rely on Benjamin's judgment in matters both large and small, trusting his youngest son's insight. Benjamin approached these responsibilities with the same gentle wisdom he had always shown, never presuming or demanding recognition. His brothers gradually came to respect him not just as Jacob's favorite, but as someone worthy of trust. The young man, who had been born in sorrow, had become the family's source of hope and stability. Benjamin's presence reminded everyone that love could survive even the greatest losses, that healing was possible even after tragedy. Through him, Rachel's legacy of gentleness and grace continued to bless Jacob's family, bringing light into their darkness. The son who had cost his mother her life had become the keeper of her memory and spirit. Benjamin carried this sacred trust with humility and honor, knowing that he was living for more than himself. In becoming his father's comfort, Benjamin had found his own purpose and place in God's greater plan for their family.